Welcome everybody to ThinkTech Hawaii Studios in downtown Honolulu. Ted Ralson here, back after a week off. In our program we call Road to the Future, which is all about technology and Hawaii's future. Technology being the art of solving problems, not necessarily circuit boards. The particular episode of our program is called Keeping the Road Open. If we're going to have a road to the future, we need to make sure that road stays open and accessible and promotes the quality of life we have here, especially in regard to disasters and post-disaster or even pre-disaster planning and such. And it's really appropriate that we talk about that now with all that's taking place on the Big Island after the hurricane that came through. And our guests today are going to give us some great insight in that direction. We have Dr. Owen Shieh, a meteorologist at the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center in Honolulu. And we have Terry Rivera, Team Rubicon Program Coordinator, and we expect to be joined by Matt Welsh a little bit later in the program here, who is Team Rubicon's Planning Coordinator. Now those names, Team Rubicon and even the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, are probably not well known by lots of people in Hawaii, but those are extremely important things to know, and over the coming months, we'd like to have everybody get a better idea of what those particular organizations are all about and how people out there in Hawaii can respond, can participate, and can perhaps join some of those organizations. Team Rubicon, of course, is what we call an NGO or a non-government organization, whereas NDPTC is a part of the FEMA organizational structure, and Owen will tell us more about that. Both of them play the critical roles in disaster operations, all the way from predictive awareness and training on the one end to field operations and immediate response on the other. So the full span of disaster operations is understood and covered by the two gentlemen who are on the show, and we expect one more to hear from him as well. I'd also like to give some thanks to Doug Martin, Jennifer Davidson, Chuck Devaney, and Nick Turner, who were on the show last Friday. Margie and I were off in California at that time at an exercise sponsored by the Naval Postgraduate School. We were in San Francisco Bay doing unmanned air vehicle operations, launching unassisted from unmanned surface vessels in company of unmanned underwater vessels, all in support of what's called maritime domain awareness or interdiction on suspect vessels. And that's something perhaps we can bring up at some point in time later. But turning to our guests, again, Owen Shieh and Terry Rivera. Let's start with Terry, sitting next to me to my left, the program coordinator for Team Rubicon. Terry, tell us what Team Rubicon is all about, where it came from, how it migrated itself to Hawaii, your role, and give us the picture on what Team Rubicon's all about.
Okay, I'll give you the short story. It's a relatively new NGO, just started in around 2010 during the Haiti earthquake. And started with a few Marines that had just gotten out of Marine Corps and a couple of first responders. Matter of fact, Jake Wood was watching it on TV Unravel, and he said, you know what, I have all these skills, I could make a difference. And through social media, he put out a message saying, I'm going to Haiti, does anybody want to join me? And he got a few, I think there were 8 of them that went initially. And during that mission on Haiti, he realized that there was that they could actually do something, that there was a need for a type of organization that could get in there quickly before the big organizations can. And that was the birth of Team Rubicon. And when he returned back to the States with those 8, now in 2014, we have approximately, I think, 16,000 volunteers all across the nation, and we've deployed and responded to not only disasters in the continental United States, but also all throughout the world. And the way, technology was the birthplace. Without social media, Team Rubicon probably would never have got started.
Fascinating history and story. Let's explore a little bit later in the program how you actually operate, how you get your command and control, how you get your orders, so to speak, to deploy, and how you handle the fact that you're also working somewhere, I would presume, and you have to pull up and take off and go somewhere. So that's on the response end of things. Let's turn to the predictive awareness and the training and understanding of the physics that characterize these emerging issues that we have to deal with, Owen. So if Owen Shieh of National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, meteorologist, tell us a little bit about NDPTC and about the role of meteorology in that activity.
So our center was founded in 2009 as a center that's funded by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. However, we are affiliated with the University of Hawaii, so the Department of Urban and Regional Planning is kind of the parent university side organization. But we are funded by FEMA, and so our mission is FEMA oriented, and the Department of Homeland Security is who we serve training wise. And so we are actually a member of a consortium of groups around the country called the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium. And that includes other universities, other training centers, whose focus lies mostly on human-made disasters, so terrorism, radiological, nuclear disasters, biological, so it runs the gamut of everything that concerns Homeland Security. Our center was founded in 2009 as a focal point for natural hazards. And Hawaii is a prime location for that because we really do get all the natural hazards here, even snow on the Big Island. And so our center focuses on that aspect. And of course, weather is a big part of natural hazards. And so I was brought on board a few years ago to help with starting and essentially managing the weather and climate-related courses. And so this past year, we actually rolled out the Tornado Awareness course. It's currently pending FEMA certification. We've already piloted it in central Oklahoma. We actually went to Norman and McAllister, Oklahoma, just within the year after the major EF5 tornadoes there. We gathered the first responders, emergency managers, all in one room and had them comment on our course. And so all of our courses are national, so all U.S. states and territories can take our courses. We're working on a hurricane course right now, hurricane awareness course, as well as a hazardous weather preparedness for campus communities, either government or academic. So we have a lot of areas to continue working on this weather and community issue when it comes to preparedness.
That's fascinating. So we have both an organized federal training consideration here, and we have an operational guy, boots on the ground and feet in the mud. How would you benefit from the kind of experience that Team Rubicon generates? We'll hear more about that, but you guys go forward immediately in a ad hoc fashion. So there's knowledge and there's experience wrapped up in your recent performance in Puna, for example, that would be probably useful for the NDPTC, I would guess, in terms of bringing that sort of thing into your training programs.
Yeah, certainly. The perspective from the first-hand perspective immediately after a disaster is crucial for being able to figure out how to fine-tune and improve training. And those of us in the operational world, training is that entire space between events. And so how do you improve upon the current knowledge base or better implement what we already know? That's where scientific research and implementation comes in. And so the first-hand responders, we can certainly learn a lot from. Not only do they take our training courses, but we're also constantly trying to gather information from them to see how we can improve the courses.
Without getting into your business that much, I would really think it would be cool to have someone from Team Rubicon as one of your instructors at some point in time, to have that reality of experience. I know that in my own career in the aerospace business, when I was moved from one job to the other, first thing I did is go to the training department and ask those guys, tell me about this new job I've taken, because they can tell it to you much more effectively than can all the engineers and the managers and such. So that's fascinating. Let's talk a little bit about Team Rubicon and how you guys operate. For example, in Puna, there's people on the ground there. You've been on the ground there.
Yes.
Just tell us how that came about. You got a call at some point in time. You got a telephone call saying, Terry, pack your bag.
We saw the bat signal, but no.
Right.
So there's different ways. Usually it starts from the state level. So we have a state leadership. We have a planning field ops person in Hawaii, and they monitor any events that, for example, the Hurricane Iselle. They will monitor it days before it hit. And they notify headquarters that, okay, we have this hurricane inbound, just advise them, for potential that we might have to respond. And then as it gets closer, they update headquarters, and headquarters, of course, they reach out to us. Is there anything we can do to support you? Do you have enough assets on the ground? What do you need? And so it's communication back and forth between the state, Hawaii, and headquarters, which was in LA. And once an event happens, State Civil Defense gets involved, and they reached out to Team Rubicon. Can you come to Puna to assist? And we have many capabilities. We could do anything from damage assessments utilizing Palantir, which is I'll speak about later. And we do muck out operations, and pretty much we're there to serve the community. If they want us to deliver ice, we'll do it. We're just happy to serve, and we don't charge anything. And that's how the base is how it begins. So it's usually from the state level, and then they reach the headquarters, and then if it's something more than the state level can handle, they could even notify members for a national response. So like Hurricane Sandy, they had members from Team Rubicon respond from all across the United States. While on this operation in Puna, they have mostly people in Region 9, which is the same regions that FEMA uses in Washington State, Oregon, and California. Actually, excuse me, not Washington State. It's California, Nevada, and Region 9, Hawaii, there you go.
So some formal entity in the state, State Civil Defense in this case, is aware of what you guys can do and has been briefed on it and such, and so they'll give you a call.
Yes, even Major General Wong, who is, he knows us very well. Yeah, great person, and a great advocate for Team Rubicon. He's been a great asset, and he's been calling us continuously and keeps us, in the loop. And State Civil Defense, they let us use their space. It's a great working relationship. Okay.
Let's take a break at this point in time and talk about the way that NDPTC gets involved in actual operations. I understand you've been to Puna yourself, and others from the agency have. So after we get back from the break, we'll talk about that. Okay.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Ted Ralson here at the ThinkTech Hawaii studios downtown with our guests on the show called Road to the Future. This one is about keeping the road open. We've just begun to open that door a little bit. Terry Rivera from Team Rubicon, who is the program director here for Team Rubicon in Hawaii, and Owen Shieh from National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, Meteorology Department. So in the last session, we talked a little bit about the organizational concept behind both Team Rubicon and NDPTC. Interesting, they emerged about the same time, within a couple of years of each other, so they're both relatively new. So the fact that people don't know much about this is not necessarily a surprise. And what we should take on in this program is the continual awareness of these kind of activities to the public, to the populace of Hawaii, make sure they're fully aware and know who to call for that matter. In fact, on that account, Zuri Bender will tell us in a moment how people who are out there listening or watching this program can get a hold of this program and provide ideas that they're interested in, and perhaps Zuri can provide how this program can be a conduit both to NDPTC and to Team Rubicon. So Zuri, tell us how people in the outside want to get a hold of us.
Okay, if you'd like to actually get a hold of the show or be a guest, you can contact us through www.thinktechhawaii.com. You can tweet us on Twitter at ThinkTechHawaii. I had to pull that up really fast so they can see it on the screen. You can also find us on Facebook at ThinkTech Hawaii. You can tag us on Instagram at ThinkTechHI. I think they get it. ThinkTech Hawaii. Get a hold of us. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Zuri. So back to our two guests. Again, we heard at the last session in some depth from Terry Rivera exactly how Team Rubicon works. It's a volunteer organization powered by enthusiastic participants who feel they want to give something back to the community and at their own expense, which we'll hear about a little bit later, I think, and risk to some extent, go forward immediately, but in conjunction with and under the invitation of a formal state agency or county agency as it may be. Let's talk a little bit about NDPTC and what it does in the actual execution of disaster operations, in addition to or in conjunction with the training that is the primary function. If you'll say some words about that, Owen.
Yeah, so we have a combination of academic and operational missions. So the training aspect is something that we do year-round, regardless of individual disaster events. As a meteorologist, what I'm doing leading up to an event, so the week before Iselle hit Hawaii, is constantly monitoring it. We were informing our staff about what to expect with the storm. And then we have a social media presence, which we try to push out notifications, the official ones from the National Weather Service, the Department of Emergency Management. And we try to emphasize to those who follow us that those are the official sources of information. So what we do with actual events is, on the research side, predominantly, is like what we discussed earlier with the perspective from first responders. We like to follow and to analyze an event to see how we can incorporate that into perhaps future case studies or into future training courses as a means to either test the current ideas or to learn lessons of better response and preparedness. And so we went to Puna district a week after the impact of Iselle, so just last week, and we went for a day to observe and to get a better idea of what the impacts really were. We didn't want to get in the way of official response operations, but we did coordinate with the State Civil Defense. So we stopped by the Emergency Operations Center, got briefed by them, and we went out and we wanted to, for research purposes, observe what was going on with the albizia trees being down, the types of damage. We went to the Kapoho area, saw a lot of the storm surge damage, and from a meteorology perspective, it follows the pattern of a lot of the major storms we've seen, like Katrina and Sandy, where storm surge impact was much greater than wind. So from a training perspective, we learned that this is one of many examples where perhaps we should make sure the public and the emergency managers are better informed about surge impacts relative to wind. Even though the watch warning system right now, as we hear it across the news and from the National Weather Service, is mostly based on wind. There's more and more need, and I know the National Weather Service is considering storm surge advisories or watch warnings coming up in a year or two. So these are things that are being discussed on the research and operational side. And so that's what we try to do during an event, is to try to gather as much information as possible so we know how to go forward in preparing and updating our training courses.
Is that information you gather useful to the current incident as it's going on as well? And certainly it improves your training programs, but is there a role you could play or do play in advising local officials about observations or potential future threats or flooding or landform, landmass, washout, and this sort of thing?
We're in contact with a lot of the local agencies on a collaborative level, and so we're connected with all the local groups. So if they need more information, we're certainly happy to provide it, or more analysis. So we have partnerships and letters of agreement with various agencies around Hawaii. So.
That brings to mind something interesting, and I'm sure both of you get embedded in this. I had some personal experience in the Philippines, and the folks on the show last Friday had some more experience than I had in the Philippines. And one thing we discovered there was once you collect information, now you've got to do something with it, and you've got to get it through some formal channel to somebody who's going to react to it, and you've got to explain what it's how it came about. You've got to identify whatever latency might be on the information, so that if it has a time after which it expires, you got to make sure people know that, and then keep it from getting in the wrong hands, especially in a place like the Philippines where it could be used against you. So that whole issue of information collection and flowing it forward is something that I'm sure you both are very sensitive to in the actual operations. And somewhere the larger community, need to take on that definition of what that information flow process is, how it's booked, especially as we start getting my favorite subject, UAVs, into the game, and there's going to be a chain of evidence and things like this that have to be dealt with. So the information management is an interesting theme I'd like to have some comments from both of you on before we're done here. By the way, before we are done, I would like to suggest that a great question to ask both of you to think about right now, if we can get the answers at the end here, but if you ran the world and you could design the future, what one thing would you want to have your organization what would most benefit it to receive in the form of technology for the next wave of emerging incidents? So we'll hold that thought till the end, but something to think about in the back plane while we're having our discussion here. So back to Team Rubicon. We've outlined, Terry, as a really novel and unique way that individual citizens can participate in a role above individual citizenship by coming together in a group that has a lot of skills. And I will say, on your behalf, I did participate in one Team Rubicon incident here on Oahu several months ago, and I was impressed by the professionalism, impressed by the lack of running around and bumping into each other. Everybody was organized, they knew what they had to do. You certainly can't do things faster than you can do them. If you have a truck, you need fuel. I mean, the two go together. If we're going to be talking about information sharing, you need a computer. If you're going to be gathering information, you need a device. So there's this framework was understood very well by everybody, and they automatically just got in position and began performing. And I was struck by that. Nobody had to tell anybody else what to do. It was just calm and collected, and it made me think that if you didn't do it that way, you'd be part of the problem, not part of the solution. So tell us practically what happens when you get the call. You work somewhere, I would presume.
I'm retired from the fire department, so for me it's easy.
Just for the benefit of the audience, tell us what fire department you retired from.
I retired out of fire department in New York City.
Right. Tell us where you were on September 11th.
I was responding out of Ladder 10, which is right across the street from the Trade Center.
Yeah. So, wow, that's some experience to have gone through. So you're clear of that at this point in time, and it's moved on. But others in Team Rubicon aren't necessarily retired. I presume they're working.
Yeah.
And so they become a critical part of a team. They have to go forward, but they have to call their boss and tell them they're not going to show up for the next 10 days. So you must tell us how that works.
Part of that fluidity that you spoke about and why it seems to be seamless sometimes, it's the majority of our volunteers are military veterans. So that in itself helps. Military veterans have a unique skill set, especially from the last 10 years of global war. These kids, most of them serve them 18 years old, and they've been responsible for millions of dollars worth of gear and responsibility that, even bigger than responsibility than I've ever had to have, people's lives, gear, and being their time and accomplishing the mission. So this generation there's about, I think, 2 million veterans is the bulk of Team Rubicon's volunteers. But we accept anybody, first responders, we have even lawyers or postal workers. So, I would say 80% are military veterans. And with that, in the military, there's no such thing as no, it's yes, sir, and you have almost like a innate ability to get the mission done, and that carries over into Team Rubicon. Like, there's pretty much nothing, we tell the people that we respond to, whatever you need, we're just here to serve. And but majority of the people, I would say, do work, and they have to call in and I give them credit. They take vacation time or out of their own pocket, sometimes at no cost to them, to go serve on these missions that they usually deploy for at least a minimum of 1 week, and some stay for 2 to 3 weeks.
That includes the airplane ticket. It includes care and feeding when you're away.
Well, Team Rubicon will cover the expenses as far as plane tickets. We have a great relationship with different carriers that provide us transport or by people donating miles, and that helps Team Rubicon out also. And but as far as food and lodging, it won't be the 5-star resorts or catered meals, but we have a MRE and a nice cot at the end of the day after hard work. So,
And equipment that you all need in terms of protective equipment, communications equipment, networks, and this sort of thing. Tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, we have an amazing partnership. The biggest one that I know about is Home Depot, and they've been pretty much any operation in the United States. Usually, you'll see Team Rubicon that will operate their forward operating base, or FOB, will be in a Team Depot, Home Depot parking lot. And they provide all the equipment we need, and anything we need, we just go to them, and it's like Santa Claus.
Okay.
And as far as communications, Motorola, I know, when I was, as a matter of fact, I didn't mention it before, because I don't, but I responded to Moore, Oklahoma. I was there for the 2 F5 tornadoes that hit. And we had radios provided by Moco. And Goal Zero is another one of our suppliers that provide us their solar chargers to help recharge our radios, because a lot of time the grid is down when we first get there. Since we're the first ones in, there's no grid, and Goal Zero has been a great partnership to us also.
So our audience here who's watching this and has capability or equipment or systems to participate with, contribute, or make available to you should get a hold of you.
Yeah, reach out to
Terry
Team Rubicon,
Rivera.
teamrubiconusa.org, and,
Okay.
And website, and there'll be a link there, and through the headquarters there will be somebody there that will gladly take any donations, equipment, or anybody wants to provide any services, we'll gladly take.
We ought to, before we adjourn here, we want to make sure that how to get a hold of you and how to get a hold of you, Owen, are clear and well known to the folks who are watching this. So, self-motivated, highly initiatized, little reward other than the satisfaction of getting the job done, well supported by the community of industry and commercial business. Very interesting and probably uniquely American type of an operation.
Yeah.
Fantastic. As far as National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, how would people interact with NDPTC? Can people take courses?
Yes, actually, even though our target audience is emergency managers and first responders, our courses are open to the public, because FEMA, especially in recent years, has been really pushing the whole community concept of training, meaning rather than just targeting emergency managers and first responders, we really want to get the whole community involved in helping each other, helping their neighbors. And so particularly our awareness level training courses, we have 3 levels of training. We have awareness, performance level, and management level, depending on the nature of the course. We have quite a few awareness level courses, and those in particular should be of interest to the public. And our training courses are free of charge for attendees. And so the public can go to our website, ndptc.hawaii.edu, and look at the current training courses that are available around the entire country. And we actually had a round robin week where we taught a lot of our courses here in Hawaii at Ala Moana Center, but it happened to be the week of Tropical Storm Azelle. So some of the attendance, especially toward the latter part of the week, was affected. So we are considering doing another one of those weeks coming up here later this year. But yeah, the public is welcome to take our courses and at no cost.
There's an organization or an operation called HART that Margie's involved in Waimanalo and other cities and towns here in Hawaii as well. HART, I think it's the abbreviation for it. And we've had a few meetings in Waimanalo so far. I don't think we've had anybody from NDPTC at this point in time, but that's the connection we should make here, I think.
Sure.
And I tell you, just as a personal observation, just going through these meetings and thinking, it just causes you to think. It makes you think about what you have to think about that we take for granted in our normal lives here. And that's really an important thing, to break through that take it for granted issue. And I will say there's other issues that emerge out of that, as we were speaking last night at the other meeting, in the case of weather, for example, which is close to your heart, I suspect. I think we heard a briefing a while ago. There's as many as 15 different websites or sources that individuals could be advised to turn to gain a sense of what the incoming weather is and then make decisions. But it would be really nice if there was like a central weather advisory system that everybody, that was useful to all and didn't cause anybody to have to make any interpretations, but simply and clearly depicted what is coming. And there's just so much of this available on individual websites and such that and they don't speak the same language necessarily. So something that speaks a really simple, clear language and advise you to wear your boots today and don't take your umbrella because it's going to blow away, but you're going to get wet. Something very, very simple would be quite useful. That's a personal observation I've made of observing how this is attempting to come together.
And that's a very interesting point, because what you're describing is actually the challenge of the entire weather enterprise. Officially, the official forecast by law is coming from the National Weather Service. And so that should be the one official source. However, depending on the needs of a certain business or an individual or a location, the private sector can come in and make interpretations on that forecast, make their own forecasts. They're not official, but they can certainly do so because that's their right to. And so the news media will have their own interpretations. You'll have meteorological consulting groups that'll forecast for train stations, for airports, for ships, for shipping concerns. Depending on what the target audience is, they'll have targeted forecasts. But they're also having to interpret or also digest the National Weather Service forecast.
This is a really interesting issue, and it probably goes beyond just weather. Let's pick that up after the break and talk more about how these specific interpretations under the umbrella of a general interpretation would benefit us all.
Okay, this is ThinkTech, and one of our favorite shows is Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. And it goes 4 to 5 every Wednesday right here from ThinkTech in Pioneer Plaza at the core of downtown Honolulu. And my co-host is Ray Starling from Hawaii Energy. Ray, do you like the show?
I love the show. It's great to see all the new people coming in with new ideas about how to save energy, get us off of fossil fuel, and that's what it's all about. So Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, see us on Wednesday afternoons at 4 o'clock.
I knew he'd say that. Thanks, Ray.
Welcome everybody again. Ted Ralson here with at the ThinkTech Studios downtown with our guests Terry Rivera and Owen Shieh, discussing the practicalities of preparation and operations in disaster preparedness, disaster execution operations and such. Just to go back a little bit, we've talked about how Team Rubicon became into existence, which is Terry's organization. We've talked a little bit about how NDPTC, and I'm sure our audience needs many more explanations of this in order to fully understand it and get it right. And of course, you'll be both moving along and developing the organizations and organizational principles as well. So we'll keep doing this periodically on this show and bring others in as get the whole story out there. We also talked a little bit about how the public can become involved, either taking training courses or even signing up to become a trusted member of the Team Rubicon organization. That would be a fantastic outcome of this segment if we could have that occur. But the thing we just were speaking of just before the last break was the multitude of sets of information coming forward, and different participating members of the public have different perceptions of what the future holds, even in the weather basis, just because they depend on different channels for information. We spoke a little bit about an urban dweller may have different needs than a rural dweller. Someone who raises horses may have different needs from someone who has heavy equipment, for example. And if you belong to a canoe club like we do, the weather the next day is important to think about how the race is going to go. So how do you train at NDPTC, for example, for these multitude of different forms of information coming forward that people should will grab a hold of. How would you think of a training program that would let them sort through that? I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm just wondering. It's an important thing in our training program, I think.
Well, that's an interesting issue, actually, for the training methodology that we use. By definition, we bring a lot of people into the room. So one thing that I noticed when we were in Oklahoma was that we had the Oklahoma City Fire Chief, we had responders and more, we had police officers, National Guard. They were all in the room together. And how often does that really happen usually, even during the event, right? And so one of the benefits of our training courses is we actually, when I begin the course, I usually tell people to take out their business cards, and part of the breaks is to actually go around and introduce each other to each other. And the benefit of that is to open up the channels of communication. And usually we actually write into our instructors' manuals that the instructors of our courses need to reach out to the National Weather Service so that they send a representative to the course if they're available. And that way, everyone in the room knows that the National Weather Service is the official source of information. But we also have a few slides in one of, for example, our tornado course, where we talk about the need and the benefit of different sectors of meteorology, such as the private sector or the broadcasters, and what they can contribute in terms of the message. But to always have a Weather Service forecaster in the room kind of grounds the official source of the local forecasting process. And so it's a multi-pronged challenge, and we're trying to address it just by opening dialogue so there's less misinformation as to, for example, what's the difference between the National Weather Service and the Weather Channel. Get that question quite frequently from the public. And so having everyone be aware of what the benefits and the purpose of each sector of weather information is one step in the right direction, I think.
That's great, and Hawaii in particular has such a unique distribution of topographical factors, orographic winds and such, and you get the windward side, leeward side, you get the dry plains, and we got the lush windward side. So you've got microclimates that exist on this island alone that can have a different response from the weather perspective to the same overarching weather picture. So people have to be able to interpret this locally. A great challenge in the training world. And let's turn to Team Rubicon. You face that all the time because you're here on Oahu in this case, but you had to go to Puna. So you had to do something about the interpretation of the circumstance you're getting into from a weather perspective and other perspectives. So how do you sort out the information you need to depend on in order to go forward effectively?
Well, we have a great technology asset is Palantir, and it's a platform that they're able to draw information from all different types of sources. And so before we even get on the scene, we already have an idea of what we're facing. So we get handheld devices, and we already have a layout, any weather conditions or anything that might be a problem, and also the areas that are affected. And so we could go right to work, and that information put on the handheld device, we're able to transmit it not only back to Team Rubicon, but also to any other agency. We're all about open source, so whether it's FEMA or civil defense, any information we gathered, we just hand it right back over to them.
So that's the reality of the situation that you're depicting through Palantir, and you collect that in some GIS framework or some other explanatory framework.
Yes.
How do you think about the predictives? What's going to happen 12 hours, 24 hours from now with that as a basis?
Right, that's, and then we have people at, not only in the field, we also have people at headquarters, and they have people specifically looking at conditions as they change. Once we have a major operation going, they're looking at conditions that are changing, especially if it's something serious like in, I would say in the Philippines, like in Tacloban, like after there was a serious rain event that happened shortly thereafter. Yolanda had hit, and so they had people at headquarters monitoring and giving them updates of people in the field. And we use the same type of, we'll consult with all different National Weather Service, even as a disclaimer, I've taken quite a few courses through the NDPTC, so it's a great resource to have, and it's great that it's free on top of it in Hawaii. So there's no excuse for anybody not taking those courses. And pretty much all the training that we do when there's not a disaster, that's what comes to fruition. So when something happens, we have all those resources already lined up.
So from what Owen described as how the training programs are constructed and how they're conceived, and what you've described about the actual operation that you go through, you've been through that sorting process that we spoke of. Just thinking out loud here, it would be great, I would think, to have Terry show up at your place for a day or two and say, this is what we actually do. And how close is this to the training, and can the training benefit from this in any respect? And what you spoke of doing, getting people to exchange their business cards through these pre-event planning sessions and such, is exactly what we're doing here. So that it's all coming together very nicely in that regard. So the question we asked earlier on was, it's time to start thinking about that answer now. The question was, if you could rule the world and design the future in the world you live in, for the greater benefit of continuity of operations, for the greater benefit of thriving of the community, those terms that really drive people, what would you or your organizations most value if you could have that delivered to you? So let me junk on a pole here and turn to Owen to start that one off. I'm not putting you on the spot or giving you any feeling of pressure or anything, Owen. Here.
No, not at all. It's a big question, of course, and I think it requires a big answer. And I think the big answer in this case would be looking at the whole field of meteorology, weather preparedness, and response. I think the biggest leap forward right now would be a better way to bridge the gap between all the great research results that are currently being discovered and being published, bridging that with the world of not only operational forecasting, but also the social aspect of response, the preparedness. And that of course is referring to the training piece. But what more can we do on top of that? I think we see time and time again that a lot of research progress isn't necessarily translated into a societal response. There's more and more effort now to translate the research to forecast operations. But now we're realizing through recent events in the world of natural hazards that we need to do even more to translate the forecast and the warnings to response and preparedness. And so it's two bridges, right? And how do we do that? How do we build those two bridges better? I think is the big goal that I personally have in mind whenever every day I go to work. This is what I'm thinking about, because of course, and as a scientist myself, we need more scientific research, we need better research, but that's the beginning of those two bridges, right? So how do we then build those other two things from there to truly bridge that gap between what we know, knowledge, and people's lives?
That is fantastic. And by the way, you've mentioned the bridge several times, and that's what Rubicon is all about. That is the bridge. Let's pull on what you said a little bit here. What goes through my mind, having heard you say that, which I think is a fantastic observation, and one that researchers often don't deal with because they just want to do their research. The translation of it into something effective that can be measured by somebody else's measure of effectiveness is something that is not necessarily interesting to the basic researchers, as I've discovered. We have Hawaii Exemplary State, the program that General Wong is promoting, and Dr. Ken Kaneshiro is helping think it through from a systems perspective. It would be, they would jump at the chance, I would say, to have research translated through that lens into utility at the exemplary state level. So without developing that thought any further here, I'd like to sort of reserve that one for the parking lot and think about it as to how that might go forward. Take it back to Ken Kaneshiro and General Wong and get their ideas. They would welcome it. I can almost assure you of that. There's some other activities that we've dealt with lately with the Hawaii Quality of Life examination, which is using complex adaptive systems as the framework for understanding how these complex things work. And I bet that as a transfer device could be that transfer agent from the research into the effectiveness domain, the state change. And I'd like to sort of, again, put that in the parking lot for right now so we can get to Terry. But what a way to push this forward and get benefit for all. And still protect the researchers who want to sit there and do their research, which is essential to us all.
Of course, and that should definitely continue.
Yeah. Terry, your turn to answer the question.
Okay, I mean, I was prior Navy before the fire department, so if it was my dream, I would like to have a Team Rubicon aircraft carrier on the East Coast and one on the West Coast to provide. But since that's not a reality, I'm going to piggyback pretty much on what he said and what he mentioned earlier about the whole community approach. And there is no one agency, one entity, not even the U.S. government, that's going to be capable of responding to a disaster. It's going to take everybody in the community. And going back even to what you said about being a citizen. Being a citizen is a lot more than just saying I'm a U.S. citizen. And I think we kind of lost track over the generations that, it comes about helping each other, neighbor in time of need, going out to vote. And when something happens, more importantly, that you're there to assist and not expect something being handed to you. And I think that's what Team Rubicon is kind of like the whole John F. Kennedy, don't ask what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country? And I think the more that people will step up, whether it's through, and some people, they don't have to physically step up, like, we take, whether it's just online. I just signed up recently, as a matter of fact, 2 days ago, through the United Nations website to help crowdsourcing, do global mapping about the Ebola crisis. So a lot of people ask me, how can I help? And there's tons of ways, whether it's from sitting in your home, to donating your time, to going out there physically and helping remove debris. That's something that everyone in the community can do.
So a whole of community approach that is continuous and isn't bounded by
limitations,
constraints in some way. It would be the corollary to what Owen's talking about in terms of the technical research flow. So you get a sort of a technical flow and a social flow that converge and somehow continually get better. We were having a discussion, Margie and I, with Dr. Grandin Gill of University of Central Florida as part of this GIFIX exercise last week. And he's all about the cognition process, how people think, how they develop, and he thinks in these dimensions as well, but from how people make decisions perspective. And the decisions would come about by virtue of the social interaction and the technical information. They'd come together. And he has some very interesting perceptions that would be interesting to me to bring into this conversation. One of them has to do with the terms like resilience and continuity and sustainment that we think about. He thinks in terms of those terms applied to the example that botany provides to us, where a sustainable community or sustainable situation is actually a terminal situation. And it is a Halekoa forest or something, that's the end of the forest. It's all Halekoa. Same thing with mangrove and such. So a thriving community is one step beyond just sustainable and resilient. It's tolerant, it's crack tolerant, damage tolerant, it's recoverable, it's flexible and agile. So there's some other interesting terms in there that would come to be discovered by this activity. I'd like to take both issues, the whole of community and the consolidation on research, back to Ken Kaneshiro, and we'll bring him back on the show, and we'll talk about this in conjunction with some of the people who deal with complex adaptive systems to see how these pieces can fold together. And in the meantime, I'd like to make sure that anybody out there in the audience knows how to get a hold of Terry Rivera at Team Rubicon and Owen Shieh at National Disaster Preparedness Training Center. So one last time, gentlemen, would you face the audience and tell them how to get a hold of you?
You want to go first?
Sure. Our National Disaster Preparedness Training Center website is at ndptc.hawaii.edu, and our contact list, including my own email, is on there.
And for Team Rubicon, it's teamrubiconusa.org, and we are on Facebook, whether Twitter, we're all over social media. And for my email is T, first initial, last name Rivera, Rivera, at teamrubiconusa.org.
Or we can find you driving around Puna somewhere,
Yes.
fixing down power lines and such. So I believe that's it for our discussion for today. Gentlemen, I thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.
Terry, Owen, it's been
Thank you.
fascinating to have this discussion. And we've just opened the door to the future here, I think, in terms of some other activities you might put on the show. So in terms of the road to the future and keeping the road open, these activities we spoke of right here are essential to keeping that road open so that the road can support commerce and economics and life. And with that, I think we'll bid adieu and adjourn and wish everybody a good weekend.